There's at our office, we have the Thanos gauntlet, and it's massive. Like it's got like little, inside it's got little finger things.
So I don't know if y'all are recording now, but we're burning through battery, so I'm gonna give you a signal around 10-minute mark to stop and check on files.
Perfect.
Cool.
Well, we're live. Good morning.
J squared.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
It's been a while.
It has.
Yeah, we're doing this now, every other week?
Trying.
It's busy, right?
It is.
Yeah, so, it's actually fascinating. So you were talking with me the other day about, how to get started in something that maybe you don't have a ton of experience in.
Right.
And, I kind of wanted to pick your brain this morning a little bit about that concept, how to find your way in an unfamiliar territory.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it, getting started in business is just that, getting started.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're looking for a perfect opportunity. We're looking for all the stars to align, or you're looking for a bunch of money, right?
Yeah.
And the truth of it is, when you're getting started, you're not worth a whole lot because you don't have a lot of experience.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He did marketing for some top companies for like 20 years. And whenever I talk to somebody, I say, what are you reading? How are you learning what you're learning? And this guy was like, well, I just do it. And he said, I learn from experience. You can read, you can do blogs, you can watch videos, whatever, but there is absolutely no substitute for experience.
Absolutely.
And so that's something that I have to keep in mind at times. You want to sometimes take a shortcut, or you don't want to be patient with your career growth or jump into the next level. Mm-hmm. And I have to remind myself at times, I need to experience it all before I get to that next level.
Yeah.
But for, especially for young people starting out, I always like to tell them, volunteer. So if you look at like an esports tournament, just volunteer at an esports tournament that's happening in your area. Be around the experience of everything that's going on, right? So let's look at an esports tournament. You have so many things going on. You have the production side of it. One thing that's crazy is people are always trying to hack the broadcast signal at esports tournaments.
Yeah.
And so they have people in the back moving that around to all these different servers and stuff. It's pretty cool to see. But you just have the whole production part of it, all these screens. You have the broadcast part. You have setting up the competition, the bracketing, things like that, and then the event part of it, right? All the things of how do you get people in through the doors and then out in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah.
Well, in that scenario, there's many things that can go wrong. There's many watch-outs that you want to have in mind ahead of time.
Yeah.
And how are you going to have those things ahead of time? Only if you've done it.
Well, actually, how are you going to plan for it unless there has been that moment of stress previously you didn't plan for it? And that's why I think, the conversation we had earlier about learning from other people and, the experience of, one of the best things when you're getting started with somebody is being around someone who has done it already.
Right.
You mentioned earlier being able to follow P. Diddy around. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so explain that concept a little bit more and how that can translate into gain the experience faster than if you were just on your own.
Exactly. So one thing I hear Gary Vaynerchuk talk about all the time is get next to somebody who's super successful.
Yeah.
He talks about the value of not necessarily making a lot of money, but just getting in at the bottom rung of the ladder.
Yeah.
And being around someone who's incredibly successful. And if you're just P. Diddy's assistant, following him around, getting his jacket, but you're in every room he's in with his meetings, you're in the car when he's on the phone, things like that, you are going to experience how he does business, what he does in certain situations, going around these certain things. So, a lot of times we want a title or we want a position that people would look up to, that you can say, look, I'm this, right? This is my title, or I do this. Man, just, young people especially, another thing Gary always talks about is how much time young people have.
Oh yeah.
And one thing that I've really kind of been struck with, so I turned 36 in a month.
Yeah.
And thinking back and thinking about the bills I have now that I didn't have.
Yeah.
You know, having a son and having these different things you have to take care of that, you know, you didn't realize how little you had to think about back then.
You do not, and yet everything stresses you out so much.
Right.
I like to think of it as, you know, it almost correlates with the idea of time as you get older. So, do you remember when you were a kid and you took an hour-long car drive and you're riding in the back?
Yes.
Do you remember how long that felt?
Forever.
It was forever. I remember, you know, being like 11 and my mom or my dad would drive about an hour.
Right.
And it was the most excruciating experience of my life.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I drive 2 hours, and it's like in a blink of an eye because I have so many pressing things in my head going on at the same time, so many things I'm concerned about, trying to think through, that it's not a long drive because I don't even notice it. It's just a background music to what's going on.
Yeah, well, I think too I've thought about that a lot, and I think a lot of what it has to do too is that time relative to the percentage of your lifespan at that point.
Yeah.
If you're 11 years old, 1 hour is a much bigger piece of your lifespan than when you're 30.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That's kind of
relative
personal take on it. It's
yeah.
Like, why? Because as I get older, it seems like time goes faster and faster and faster. It's like, well, because that's a smaller piece of my full lifespan. One thing I was going to say was that, you know, I look back all the time, you know, being 36 now, or almost 36, and I, you know, had a unique career path, skating and going back to school late and all that stuff. But if you look at where I am now, let's say if I graduated from college when I was 22, I would have 14 years experience doing something. It's a long time. It's a lot of experience.
Yeah.
And so that's what I like to relay to college students is you have so much time. Like when you're 30, you're gonna have 8 or 10 years of experience and you're gonna be an expert on this thing.
Yeah.
And it's right around that, you know, 8 or 10 years when you'll see more of a spike in your income and you'll see like those promotions start to happen and things like that. But yeah, there's a big piece of just start doing it, and the more of the individual pieces of a business that you've experienced, when you're doing marketing or you're doing production or activation or something, you know how to confront those things because you know it automatically.
Right.
So one example I always give is, so years ago, I partnered with Ambassador Skateboards, and they still sponsor me to this day. And when I came, when I was introduced to them, they were just kind of a startup. They didn't really know what they were doing yet from a skate demo perspective. So to give you an idea, skateboard companies will go out on the road, they'll go filming and stuff, but they'll go to skate shops and they'll do a demo. Everybody watches the pros skate, and then you do autographs, and people become a fan of your brand. The skate shop buys all your boards, and then the local kids, you know, buy your boards because they're now a fan of you because they met you, sort of thing. Well, when I met Ambassador Skateboards, I had literally done hundreds of skate demos all over the country at that point. And I was able to come alongside them and just say, look, this is how you do a demo. From how you pack and unpack the truck with all the ramps in it, to you don't try any tricks that won't take you more than 3 tries, to demo skating is different than regular skating. You want to do big airs rather than technical tricks because half the people at the demo aren't skaters and they don't know what your board flipping really fast means.
Yeah.
And then the last thing you do is you jump over a bunch of people off a ramp and the crowd goes crazy. So these were just things that I automatically knew because I had experienced it so many times for so many years.
Yeah. And that's,
You're not looking at the camera, are you?
No, sir.
Nope. Right at this.
I did that last time. You had to. Started, I think.
Really good for that sentence.
All right, cool. Yeah, so getting started is interesting because you're not always getting started at the beginning of your life. True. And I think in today's economy where people keep a job on average 2 years at this point.
Right.
You know, a lot of times getting started for some people is at 28.
Yes.
A lot of times getting started for people is at 34.
Yes.
And so, yeah, like, you know, I think I resonate with this a lot. I literally just got chills just from saying that. And I think it's because life is not cookie cutter in the way that you're taught that it is as a kid.
Right.
You know, I don't care, you know, what your background is. Most of us can relate to the fact that our parents, our teachers always said, these are the things that you do to get here. And then you realize that you start working towards the things that they said that you're supposed to do, and you go, but I want to do that. I want to go over there and do this thing.
I want to go skateboarding.
Yeah, I want to do this. I want to go skateboard. Or you know what? In my case, I studied finance in college. I was a banker for a number of years.
Yeah.
And what am I now? I own a marketing agency.
Right.
And you know, it took a while for me to get from, you know, this young focus of I'm supposed to make money, and I'm supposed to sell my soul, and I'm supposed to do something that I necessarily don't enjoy,
right?
Because I'm supposed to meet these expectations, check these boxes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're talking about how to get started in something, but switching into something is also getting started. It's later on in life that this sometimes happens for, I think, all of us at some point.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, you mentioned some really good insights, I think, on how to get started. I'd love to kind of pick your brain. Now, can you tell me about a time that you got started, but maybe on something later, something newer?
Yeah.
That you weren't so familiar with?
Absolutely. I mean, fortunately and unfortunately, I have all sorts of examples. You know, obviously, unique career path. Like I said, I went after skating, going back to college. Had an opportunity to help launch a design studio.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I didn't know the first thing about Photoshop. I was literally memorizing what we'd do, like flashcards, going to Nike headquarters just like before negotiating our first contract with them, and like, okay, Wait, hold on, wait. So I just want to like play this scenario out in my head. You're walking into Nike headquarters, selling them something. Yes.
Reviewing your flashcards before you go in, because I love that. I love that. That's like Bill Gates telling IBM that he has an operating system when he didn't at all. You know, go ahead.
Well, and you know, this goes with, you know, complementary expertise, right? So like, you know, my business partner, he was a design expert, you know, amazing graphic design and animator. So he knew what he was doing. He brought me in to help on the business side and, you know, help with bandwidth, things like that. But yeah, I mean, our service offering, I was literally I made flashcards. I'm on the plane flying to Portland. We designed across all visual mediums, broadcast, print, you know, and then just going in and
did you pull them out in the meeting? You're like, hold on.
I think they're in my back pocket in the meeting. Yeah, they fell out. Oh.
Wouldn't that be embarrassing if they had fallen out? You're like leaving and like you left your flashcards.
Less embarrassing if we'd already signed the contract.
Less embarrassing, for sure.
But yeah, so getting into that was, you know, that was really tough because I didn't know at all anything, you know, even it's like speaking a new language. Yeah. But what I learned, because I was kind of the client-facing guy. Yeah. And so what I learned was the reason that clients were hiring us to do graphic design and animation was because they couldn't do it themselves. They didn't understand it. And so I was reading a lot of books and really spending a lot of time learning what you need to do when you're getting into something new. But I was better able to relate to the client who was not an expert in graphic design than somebody who had been doing graphic design for 15 years. Yes. Because it was obvious to me their questions. Yeah. Well, why can't I turn that? Why can I change the color on that and it's not a big deal, but I can't change the color in that and that's going to be, you know, 2 more weeks and 10 grand more. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And being able to speak their language, because that's my first language. Yeah. I learned the graphic design language and then I'm able to be the intermediary there. Yeah. Another example is going from design studio to a big agency. So one of the things I always tell people is leverage your past experience for future opportunities. Yes. So I was able to get my foot in the door at a big agency with my animation, graphic design, production experience, doing production for live action.
Yeah.
Which live action is like 10 times more the work and organization, which I found out after I got hired.
Yeah.
But then I was in the building, I used my networking skills to then create relationships in marketing departments, because I always wanted to do a more marketing specific role. Then when I went to GameStop, I had a lot of sales experience, which made sense for partnerships, but corporate partnerships are a little different than, you know, B2C like sales.
Sure.
But I was able to understand, you know, how to create value, how to find out goals, things like that, and then apply what I knew to the things that I then learned to do that. So those are some of the things. I think a lot of it has to do with just, you know, fearlessness, for lack of a better term.
Yes.
Not being able to, not being afraid to try it.
Yeah, or being afraid and trying it anyway.
Oh, yes, exactly.
You know, I was telling, you know, a really good friend of mine the other day, we were having a conversation, and he said, you know, to me, he's like, you know, you started a business in an industry that you hadn't actually worked in before.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yes.
And I would be lying to say that I wasn't scared. You know?
Right.
And, you know, from my perspective, that was probably one of those most beautiful moments of my life, is looking out a window saying, can I pull this off? Can I do this?
Right.
And then through struggle and pain and through hell and high water, like getting it done no matter what the cost type mentality, you show yourself that you can.
Right.
By being, you know, aware of what resources are around you, and like we had talked about earlier, you know, leveraging the strengths of others, right? Knowing what you're good at, knowing what you understand, and strengthening that, and then bringing in these other skill sets from these other people who can, you know, can make this a complete offering, a complete service, you know, a complete company that doesn't lack.
Right. Well, I heard a great quote, or I saw a great quote the other day, and I'm trying to remember it exactly, but it said something like, courage is not being scared, is not trying something that you're not scared of. Courage is being scared and doing it anyway.
Exactly.
Essentially.
100%.
And one thing I've experienced, I remember recently I was asked to do something at work that I'd never done before. And at this point I've done that so many times.
I relate, you know, I relate.
It's just like, okay, let's learn it. Let's do it. And it can be scary, but also it's almost like you become desensitized to being afraid to try new things. Yeah. I started a friend the other day, I said, man, I think I specialize in doing things I've never done before. And so I think a lot of people, you know, a lot of people don't reach out and try new things. A lot of people learn their one thing and they kind of stay in their lane and they just do that thing. And I think it has to do with a lot of the psychology of that person, you know,
which is fine. Which is fine. Yeah, I think there's, like,
it's not a criticism of them. It's just different people are wired different ways, and some people, and you need people who are just focused on executing this one thing and they're fine with it. Then I think the world also needs people who are movers and shakers and are changing stuff and doing that.
Yeah, 100%. I think, you know, that's actually used to be where I would fall short quite a few times was, you know, I had this mindset of like, I'm a go-getter, I'm gonna try new stuff, I'm gonna be brave, I'm gonna be courageous. And anyone who kind of wasn't that way, I was, you know, I kind of looked down on that type of mentality, but then you realize, you know, it's the yin and the yang, right? Like, one can't survive without the other.
Yeah. You need both.
You're stupid if you think that like if everyone was one way and just like you, this world would be very different.
Yeah, you have somebody, if you only had the movers and shakers, nothing would actually get done because you don't have the disciplined person to continue doing it.
There'd be a lot of talk and not a lot of really cool.
And then the other thing, nothing would change because it'd just be getting it done.
Exactly.
Is that time? Cool. Let's see. And then we can do, so we kind of did that.
You know, doers of the craft, you know, like, are we camera recording again? Okay. So, you know, to kind of segue a little bit, you know, you had mentioned, you know, with your prior skateboarding experience, you had a lot of experience, I think, helping to align the interests of different groups.
Right.
You know, because like we just talked about, there being movers and shakers and there being technical people. This is directly applied towards kind of what you do in a sense right now, in the esports arena, where you have a growing and increasingly fervent, almost like passionate group of people who really enjoy this almost new genre entirely of gaming, the way it's being perceived by the world, and obviously anytime that attention comes to a certain area, who comes in, right?
Right.
More, corporate interests, people who say,
Investment.
okay, there's an opportunity here, and like we said, they both need the other.
Right.
To a degree, but with your experience, I think in skateboarding, that is an industry that you have described to me several times as an industry that is highly suspicious of large interests coming in and taking over their domain and removing the thing that they love from the thing they love, turning what they love to do into a job that they don't want to do anymore. I don't, tell me a little bit more like, how that applies to esports and.
I mean, skateboarders are extremely skeptical of brands that are not owned and operated by skateboarders.
Yeah.
Nike is a perfect example. I mean, Nike with, their marketing expertise, their success in traditional sports, it took them 3 different times to get into skateboarding. The first 2 times they're completely rejected and they failed. The 3rd time they had a completely different strategy where it was a very slow burn strategy.
Yeah.
Where they actually, they sponsored not the top guys. So you look at Nike now, they almost have 2 different teams. Well, they almost sponsor everybody, first of all. But they have the top tier teams where you have your Paul Rodriguez, Shane O'Neill, Eric Costins, those guys. And then they have a lot more core guys who, if you only know about skateboarding competition, you don't know about like video parts and stuff, you wouldn't know who these guys are. But so they started just filming sponsoring these super core guys. And the approach there was people would come to these guys that were beloved by the industry and be like, dude, why are you messing with Nike? What's up with that? And they'd say,
why are you selling out?
Exactly. And these guys would say, hey man, I mean, you can hate on it, but I can't hate on it because the reason I'm able to skateboard for a living is because Nike's backing me.
Yeah, otherwise I would be waiting tables somewhere and skateboarding way less.
That's right. And they continued this process for this strategy for several years. About 7 years ago, and this is when I look at esports, when I look at almost anything that has to do with a subculture and big brands, this is kind of my guiding light. Nike, so let me back up just a minute here. So skateboarding is all about street skateboarding.
Yeah.
It's about skating the streets, what's meant not to be skated. There's various famous spots all over the world. So like UC Davis, the college UC Davis is a famous skate spot. There's spots in Barcelona that are famous. Wallenberg School in San Francisco. The Santa Monica Courthouse or the West LA Courthouse is one of those spots.
Yeah.
It was in all the videos in the 90s. Over time, skateboarding, kind of destroys property, unfortunately.
Waxing all the ledges and
grinding it and everything.
Yep.
So, that courthouse, it almost looks like it's made for skateboarding. Well, over time, the ledges get all broken apart and becomes illegal to skate there. Nike worked with the city of Los Angeles to not only legalize skateboarding there, but refurbish the entire place. On Go Skateboarding Day, June 21st, they had about 7 or 8 years ago, they had this massive release. You can go there 24 hours a day, 365, and skate there now. And so
that's awesome.
What Nike did in that moment was they gave skateboarding something that skateboarding could not get for themselves. So my major guiding light when I'm looking at, activating in esports or gaming or any of the other things I have my hands in that has to do with the subculture is how can you give the community more of what they want that they cannot attain for themselves?
Yes.
Because when you look at Nike, I mean, people still hate on Nike because it's a big corporate brand in skateboarding. I like to say it's 2 things in skateboarding. It's public enemy number 1 and market share number 1. And so when you look at the courthouse example, you can hate Nike, you could dislike the corporate structure that it's not owned by skateboarders, but you cannot hate on that thing that they gave the skateboarding community.
You're right. That was a grand kind of overt gesture that meant a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, but I do think too that, you know, kind of that's like more like a macro gesture, like here's this big thing, but you know, staying on message with brands in these subcultures, as you like. I like that word, subcultures. I think you describe it. That's good. But you know, I think you know, the truth is that when they both need each other at the end of the day, and they can't survive without the other. Well, they can, but not to the level if they work together.
Yeah, you look at esports. Why do more tournaments happen? Because there's more money to do more tournaments. Yeah. Right. And the biggest bulk of money in esports right now, outside of the money the publisher gets owning the IP, is sponsorship dollars. Yeah. And so the reason why you have these big, expensive tournaments all over the country is because they are being funded. It requires money for this to happen, and the people who give that money are sponsors. Yeah. And you know, to your previous question, you know, I have a pretty good understanding of the skepticism of big brands through skateboarding, and it's similar in gaming. But gamers actually have a more healthy skepticism of sponsors than skateboarders. Skateboarders, we don't want anyone in our space. We would rather be poor and have our own companies and do our own thing than to have some big company invest a bunch of money into us. It's like, this is not ours. This is not yours. This is ours. Yeah. Gamers have more of a desire to go mainstream, but they're still skeptical, which is healthy. So when a company comes in, and if they don't do it right, they just do a logo slap, or it's obvious that it's a cash grab sort of thing, that when the sponsorship doesn't make sense authentically, which is the overused word, gamers reject it. But the cool thing is, when it's done the right way, when it's done with the gamer in mind first and the company in mind second, when they're adding value to the experience of the gamer, whether that's competing or the fan experience or all these things, then they're embraced. And the company is essentially rewarded for entering the space in the right way. And then the gamer is rewarded by having value added to their experience and also having dollars to fuel their tournaments and their experiences. It's like you don't show up to a house party without a bottle of wine. There you go. Exactly. I mean, you have to add value immediately in some way. I think, did you ever hear a lot of mediators talk about the dilemma of like sharing the orange? I haven't heard that. Okay, so I was actually reading this, I think like 6-7 months ago. Okay. And this guy was talking about a really good book. I'll send it to you actually. It's about negotiating, but he said there were two people that were fighting over an orange. Okay. And the premise was neither one was gonna budge. I want the orange, no, I want the orange. And they were just fighting over this orange. Okay. Mediator comes in at the end of the day. They come to this conclusion, well, why do you want the orange? Well, I need the skin of the orange to create this thing. And then the other person says, well, I want the fruit inside the orange to eat. Right. And the whole time they had no idea that what they wanted from the orange was different and could be split easily. But instead they spent, so much time, fighting over the orange that the orange almost went bad and no one got anything. So it's an interesting phenomenon, understanding intention, I think, and that's kind of what you're speaking to is, brands, especially when they come into esports or skateboarding or a subculture like that, understanding, making sure that their intention is understood and that their intention is to help and not just take the whole orange. Yeah, well, I've been in a lot of, conference rooms at multiple companies when we're talking about what are the goals for the brand. And we're saying, these are our goals, these are our goals, these are our goals, etc. And someone needs to raise their hand and say, what does the consumer care about? Yeah, 100%. They don't care if you increase your sales. No. What they care about is their experience. And there's a great quote, I love, it's from the former CEO of Macy's, I believe, and it's, if you love the brand, you won't miss the sale. So add the experience, give people a reason to love your brand, give them, memories of saying, wow, that brand helped me do this, then they're gonna choose you over your competition because they want to. Absolutely, absolutely. It's a good conversation. Yeah. This is good. Mm-hmm.
industry never comes without sacrifice. Okay. So like kind of ask me a little about like, you know that I've been in several different industries and you know, I've kind of made some drastic changes and maybe how, you know, what was some of the key lessons you learned in that process, something like that, you know?
Cool. All right, so for you, Joseph, you know, you've made some changes throughout your career. You've worked in banking, private equity, agency, own an agency now. And there's some sacrifice involved with those things, right?
100%.
So what are some of those lessons that you've learned as you've hopped around and you've learned through these experiences?
Well, okay, so from a sacrificial perspective, money is a big one for people. You know, and I got to say, there's been so many times, you know, across my career path that I have left money on the table because I chose to go do what I wanted to do and not what just made more money.
Yes.
You know, now I've done well over my, you know, short
Congratulations.
life. Thank you. But you know, it's a fascinating concept. Like you don't get to have your cake and eat it too.
Right.
You know, like if you want to go learn something new, like for example, you know, when I was in banking and I wanted to leave and get into the private equity and venture capital world, you know, the opportunities that presented themselves to me were not come in as a partner at a private equity firm. That's not how it happened. No one just showed up. Even though I applied for some higher level positions, they did not happen right away. And so I actually left a very well-paying job in banking to be an intern at a venture capital firm. Literally making $12 an hour.
Interesting investment.
It was. And everybody, you know, I was dating a girl at the time and she thought I was insane. She was like, why would you leave this secure, benefit, well-paying job to go basically live off savings for 3 months to go do a summer internship at a venture capital group? And for me, I was just so fueled by this desire to be in this industry. Like I was so singular in my goal. I'm going to go do this thing, and it didn't matter what I had to do. It was just like, what moves do I make to do this? And so the move that I had available was to go take an internship, to humble myself, to understand that, you know what, I have to give up the way that I look right now to other people. I have to give up some of the income most of the income that I was making. I had to give up the title. You know, I had to be willing to humble myself and understand that, you know what, like Gary Vaynerchuk says, or all these people, that being around people that have succeeded, being around, you know, people that are doing what you want to do is one of the most important things to learn something. And honestly, that little 3-month experience changed my life.
Interesting.
It changed the entire way that I looked at business, and being surrounded by, you know, funded startups, smart people that are literally trying to change stuff, you know, literally trying to change the world. And you see that, and it's just intoxicating. And so, funny enough, you know, I get a job at this VC fund, and within 3 months, I had a good paying job again. You know, because I was doing whatever it took. I mean, any meeting that I went to, I'm like writing down tons of notes. Like, and I was looking at everybody around me in the most competitive fashion you probably, I don't even know if it's healthy at this point, but I'm a team player, you know, whatever, but like, I was like, we talked about this at a meeting, I'm leaving and I'm coming back with things that I have learned, with things that we can do, with solutions to these problems. Like, I'm not going to show up here without some level of value to add. And I think that was great. And then I did it again. I became chief of staff of this fund, right? And after a couple of years, I said, I fell in love with the growth marketing, growth hacking, you know, customer journey marketing that we have been involved in. And I said, I want to go do this on my own. So I took another pay cut. Now, you know, obviously my title changed to CEO, but CEO of me. It wasn't like I was part of some prestigious group. It was,
I'm CEO of all sorts of things.
I'm CEO of me, you know, which is funny, but, you know, people look down on me then too. Well, I don't know if they look down on me. I think that's kind of like my internal head, just how people viewed it. But I do think there was an element in both of those scenarios where other people said to me, or maybe I said to myself, you know, people won't look at you the same. And you know what? Fuck it. Right. I don't care. Yeah. Like I think we all care a little bit about what people think about us, but for me at that time, it was very much, I want to do this.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I'm willing to be embarrassed, and I'm willing to fail.
Right.
I'm willing to experience other people going, why would he leave that for this? And he screwed everything up. I don't.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, you know, talk about failing. You never truly fail. You know, I was talking about this with somebody else, and
unless you die.
I was right there. You go. I was talking about this with a friend the other day, and I was just talking about, you know, different positions I've gone to, you know, in work and things like that. And he said, "Man, think of everything that you've learned since the last time. You know, like you went from this thing to this thing to this thing, like." You're a completely different person, even if you have this perspective of not knowing as much as you wish you knew, or feeling like you don't know everything, which I always kind of feel like I should know everything and I don't know everything. You're like, look back 2 years and think, what do you know now that you didn't know then? That was a great perspective, because let's say your agency, let's say you didn't make it financially, you had to fold up shop and do something else.
Sure.
Right?
My worst nightmare.
Right. So that would be, a lot of people would say that's a failure. You left this thing and you tried to start your own agency and it didn't work out, right? Well, think about the process you went through that time. What have you learned? What are your experiences? What do you know now that you didn't know then that you can now apply to the next thing?
Yes.
And I think that's a perspective that, number one, is important so that we're not scared to do things, but it's more positive. It's more a long-term goal. You know, I think one of the neat things, one of the best pieces of advice I got was I was working at a tax firm, and I was about to leave the tax firm and go back to school. Similar to you, like taking a pay cut. I wasn't making a lot of money then. I was low level at a tax firm, but chose to go work at Starbucks and go to school.
Sure.
And I knew I wanted to major in marketing, but didn't know what I wanted to do beyond that. And somebody gave me some great advice. He said, don't even worry what you're going to do after school. He said, it's 4 years. Your interests will change. You'll experience things that you are not even currently aware of.
Yep.
Just go on the adventure.
Yep.
And this guy, he'd been a lifeguard in Hawaii and all these things, and he was like an internal educator at our tax firm. It was like, how'd you go from there to there? He said, you couldn't do a straight line from where I started to where I am now, but if I told you all of the different stepping stones, all the different dots, it would make sense that this led to this, to this led to this, this led to this. Yeah. And that has absolutely been true in my life. You couldn't draw a straight line from Reedley, California, where I grew up, to Dallas, Texas, where I am now. But if I gave you all the details of all the different, starts and stops, it would make sense that this led to this, this led to this, this led to this.
100%. One thing too that I think is really important is, when you are switching to something new, for me, the things that I've always switched to were very varied. They were very varied in their experience. They were diverse. So in VC, we had 17 portfolio companies. At my agency now, we have like 10 retainer clients, right? And so it's interesting being in situations where there's always so much different stuff happening. Yeah. Because you're learning, like all of our companies now, they couldn't be more different in terms of how they operate, what they're selling, their messaging, the different tactics that we're using in their marketing efforts, who they're targeting. Yeah. They could not be more different. And I think, and the same in VC, it's I think seeking out experiences that do test you in that way, that that are not like, okay, I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to go set this down over here. Right. That might get you through a time when you need money. You know what I'm saying? And that's important. But you need to seek out stuff that's going to intellectually stimulate you. Yeah, well, and something you said a little earlier, which was, is that 10 minutes? Or
yeah.
We can do it.
When I walk up, just try to mentally finish out your sentence and then give some pause, because
cool.
you were talking and then you turned your head, so I got to find a cut right there.
Ah, sorry.
So if you could, as soon as I set the cameras again, just kind of like
back up and
just back up that one sentence you were on.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah. So do you want to? We didn't really talk about your speech in Houston. Do you want to talk about that? Is that something you want to talk about, or?
We don't need to. What I was going to because I loved marketing, I wanted to learn it, and I had this experience in the class one day where these girls were like, I didn't learn anything. I was like, I learned 10 things. They're just not on the test, you know. So I wanted to kind of talk about that.
Okay.
So let's to base point. Let's back up to. Do you remember your sentence before?
We're talking about diverse experiences.
Right.
And how seeking out these experiences that stimulate you intellectually.
Yeah, so start talking about that, and then I'll ask you about like the passion stuff.
Yeah, so it's super important to, you know, anytime you're seeking out a new start or you're switching careers, you really want to put yourself, you know, you know how people use the term, we're going to drop you in the water and hope you can swim or something like that. I think I'm messing that up really bad right now.
I think so.
But but it's true. Like, you know, you sink or swim. You know, it's, you know, put yourself in a position where there's a lot of variables you've never experienced before, and that in order to survive, you have to do something entirely different.
Right.
Than you've been doing.
Well, I think the thing that really fuels you through doing that is passion, right?
Absolutely.
And so when I was hearing you tell your story of going from one thing to another, what I heard was you were following your passions and you were going above and beyond, not because you had to, but because you wanted to.
Yeah, driven.
Right.
Push versus pull, right?
That's right. I can relate to that I went to school at Sacramento State, and I am very thankful for getting such a great education there. But I think beyond it just being a great school, one of the reasons I feel like I got a better education than a lot of my classmates because I was so purposeful in what I was learning.
Yes.
When I went back to school, I was like, I need to get my piece of paper, my ticket to the real world. I didn't realize how much I was going to learn. But I was very purposeful. I wasn't just like, let's go party. You know, I was like, I want to learn this stuff and get my degree so then I can go do marketing. And my life experience helped a lot, but the passion really helped. I remember I had this advertising class, and the teacher wasn't a great professor from a test standpoint, but she was a great teacher from a real world standpoint. She worked at Leo Burnett, she worked at Saatchi & Saatchi, some of these really iconic agencies.
Yeah.
And I remember I sat next to these two girls in this class, and one day they were complaining at the end of the class. They're like, I can't believe I showed up today. I didn't learn one thing. And I was just thinking in my mind, man, I learned 10 things, but they're just not on the test.
Yeah.
You know, but they're going to be valuable later on.
Yes.
And so it sounds like similar to you in your work experience,
100%.
you were learning probably a lot more in these meetings, taking notes than a lot of other people because you were so passionate about it.
Yeah, well, and too, you know, that I'm glad you talked about that because that's always been my love-hate relationship with school, right? Was, you know, I enjoy school, but usually only when it's talking about something that I know is applicable to my life.
Right.
Sometimes you learn things that you don't realize are applicable later on.
Sure.
You know, so there is that lack of insight into what you need 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Or 4 years from now. But, you know, being purposeful about what you learn because, like, so for now, like, you know, I think you and I are both lifelong learners in a sense.
Yes.
I think we're both people that we see a problem and we immediately start studying.
Right.
And we're not picking up a textbook from, you know, Sacramento State or SMU. Right? But we are going online on YouTube and Google and we're solving these problems and learning to fix this problem.
Right.
And when you learn with that intent, like I've got a directly applicable situation that I'm passionate about solving, and these are the things that can help me make these decisions, and then you do it and you implement it, and you've learned a skill set quickly.
Yeah.
You know, it's why so many people graduate with master's degrees in marketing, but they come to the agency and then we're like, okay, well, this is actually how you. Have you ever used Google Analytics? Well, no. Okay. Have you ever run an ad on Facebook? Well, no.
Right.
Have you ever done Google AdWords management? Well, no. How much did you pay for your schooling?
Right.
$350,000 for undergrad and master's degree, and you're like, holy moly.
Right.
You know?
Well, that's where you go back to the experience again, right?
Yeah.
Which is doing it.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, there's a value in the education, depending on what you're doing, and you know, I think there's something like 70% of people end up working in a field that they didn't study in college.
Yeah.
Sort of a thing.
Yeah.
I think I benefited quite a bit from trying the skateboarding thing, having to have a bunch of crappy jobs, and then it really being evident what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
To be purposeful. Question for you though, when you talk about passion, how much do you think that's a balance of?
Oh, this is a good one.
You know, seeking something that makes money and your passion. I always say, I always encourage kids to go to school to pursue a business education, because I always say marketing or a business education, more broad, helps you learn how to make money doing what you love, or avoid doing what you love for a living because it doesn't make any money.
Well, actually, I mean, my life is a direct reflection of the answer to this question from my perspective.
Okay, cool.
So I studied finance first. I was in banking, and then I went in venture capital, and then I found the thing I loved.
Yeah.
Now, I know people like who would tell me, "Man, what if you would have just done marketing and advertising from the beginning?" Mm-hmm. They might be right. I might be farther in certain skill sets, you know.
Sure.
But having this completely different background helps me to see what this agency does in such a different way. Mm-hmm. You know, so business owners, which I had more experience working with businesses and growing businesses than I did on the marketing front, like back then.
Right.
And I think that being able to speak that language and being able to understand it from the right, like we said, getting into the mind of the subculture, right? Mm-hmm. The customer's perspective, the client's perspective.
Right.
That I used to be the client.
Right.
You know, I used to be the person who was.
I mean, being the target, that kind of goes back to the experience piece, is like, if you are the target, you understand how to target those people better because it's you.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people that started in marketing and you know, they've got all this experience at these agencies, and they tried to start their own, mm-hmm. and they couldn't. Even though they had all the technical skills in the world, they couldn't do it.
Why was that?
You know, it's hard for me I can't say they didn't do it because of these reasons, but from my understanding is a lot of it was they couldn't convince people that they had their interest in mind good enough to hire them as an agency, and they couldn't land enough clients. Usually that's what it is.
Right.
You know, we're lucky in the sense on our end that we have more work. Like we're constantly keeping up with the workload, and that's partially because, you know, our agency is formed around this idea of it's the client's perspective. Everything we do has to have an ROI. If it doesn't, what's the point?
Right.
You know, and looking at it from that perspective, that the passion that we have for the growth hacking and the marketing piece and the advertising piece wouldn't matter as much if we didn't have the perspective from the other side, which wasn't as passionate learning that. Wasn't as passionate learning about some of these other things.
Right.
But now you've married the two, and there is that balance.
Right. Well, I did a TED Talk a while back. It's about instant gratification.
Yes.
But a lot of how that applies towards business is that the result, being able to do things you don't want to do, while focusing on a long-term goal, brings around success.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're, this is something that, I mean, honestly, I struggle with, you know? Like, I don't like doing things I don't like to do. Right? It's hard for everyone, but I always, you know, I use fitness as an example. You know, summer's coming, right?
I know, I gotta.
You know what I don't like to do? I don't like running. I don't like doing cardio. But I'm going to be glad come April or June or whenever, when I go to the pool, that I'm in shape because I've been doing all this stuff I don't like to do.
Yes.
Right? And then also, the more I do something I don't like to do, the better I get at it, and then the more I enjoy it.
Absolutely, 100%. Thank you so much, man. This has been a good conversation. I can't wait to do this again in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on, brother.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you.
All right.